Hello, everyone. It is Kevin Henry with Fansided and Call to the Pen, and it's my honor today to be joined by Jack Curry with the Yes Network and also the author of the book, The 1998 Yankees, the inside story of the greatest baseball team ever. Hey, Jack, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Kevin. How about yourself?
Doing well. Thank you so much. I enjoyed this read a lot. My grandpa was a Yankees fan, so it really was great to think back to some of those moments of this great team. And one of the things that I loved was that you set the table for the 1998 season with the disappointment that came with the 97 season and how that ended. And I thought that was really interesting to see the motivation for this team heading into 98.
Kevin, I work for the Yes Network now. I'm on the TV side doing the pregame and the postgame. But back in 97, 98, as you referred, I was a sports writer for the New York Times. And I remember the misery in that Yankee clubhouse in 1997. And I've been in some losing clubhouses before, but there was something different about how depressed that team was because the Yankees won in 96. A lot of those players were back in 97 and they envisioned another run to the World Series. And when that didn't happen, I do believe, Kevin, that failure carried over into 1998. Bernie Williams is quoted in the book talking about how he made the final out against the Cleveland Indians. They were the Indians then in the postseason, and he carried that through the offseason. Every time he ran sprints, every time he lifted weights, every time he thought about the 98 season, he thought about not wanting to be the guy who made the final out or, quote, failed in the postseason.
You read my mind because I was going to ask you about Bernie because as I read the book, it seemed like his motivation not only pushed him, but really soaked into the rest of the team.
Bernie was a quiet leader on those Yankee teams. He wasn't a guy who made a lot of noise, but he was eternally respected by his teammates. Just the talent that he brought, the gentlemanly ways that he brought, but he was distraught. Paul O'Neill was distraught. Mariano Rivera, who gave up a homer to Alomar Jr. in Game 4 when the Yankees were 4 games away from clinching the series, was distraught. But yeah, Bernie, I think, was sort of the symbol of how distraught they were. And I know when I spoke to him about it for this book, there was a part of him that was saying, are we really going to go down this road again? But then when he went down that road, Kevin, it was sort of you or I talking about the nightmare we had because he was very vivid and very willing to talk about that nightmare. And I think he still plays that at bat over in his head. O'Neill had doubled off the fence. They brought in a pinch runner, and Bernie's sitting there knowing that if he just smacks a single, he ties the game up. He jumped on a fastball on a slider from Mesa that wasn't really that good of a pitch, and I think Bernie still thinks to this day it's probably a pitch he should have lined for a single, not hit in the air.
The 25th anniversary of this team, and I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit in the story here, but how satisfying was it for the Yankees to then beat Cleveland in 98 on the way to that World Series?
Ultimate satisfaction. And when you think of how that series played out and how Knobloch had a gaffe in the field where he didn't chase after a ball that led to a loss, and then they fall behind 2 games to 1, and they're relying on El Duque, who was their newest pitcher, essentially. Kevin, this is a team that had David Cohn, a Cy Young Award winner, David Wells, a top end of the rotation pitcher, Andy Pettitte, one of the best postseason pitchers statistically in history. But when they reflect on that Game 4 win over Cleveland, they all think El Duque was the perfect guy. He was fearless. He was fearless. He wasn't going to be worried about anything that was thrown at him. So I think when El Duque gets that win, that team just took off. They won the last 7 postseason games they played. As you said, they vanquished Cleveland and they swept San Diego. It's why the dominance of this team is something that I tried to stress in the book. We called them on the cover of the book the greatest team of all time. Of course we did. I wrote that book and I believe that, and I try to make that case in the book. You could easily argue that you can't make that case, but I will say when you talk about dominance, it's hard to find another team that was as dominant in so many areas as that 98 team.
And you mentioned El Duque. One of the things we always think about Jeter and Bernie and so many of the other big names around that team, but there were a lot of role players and a lot of, shall we say, maybe second tier players that really contributed so much to that championship as well.
Kevin, I've been covering baseball for more than 30 years, and I always think about teams that are great or amazing or maybe even extraordinary, like this 98 team. They're going to be the players that you rely on. Jeter was Jeter, O'Neill was O'Neill, Tino was Tino, Wells, Cone, Mariano, go right down the list. But if you want to make that next leap to this kind of extraordinary status, you need some players to exceed what your expectations were for them. And I think the Yankees had three of them: El Duque, Scott Brocious, and Shane Spencer. They acquired Scott Brocious from Oakland and were hopeful that he could be a starting third baseman who played good defense, gave them a little offense, and if that didn't work out, use him as a utility guy. When they got El Duque, they were excited, but they thought he was a back end of the rotation guy. And Shane Spencer had been marooned in the minor leagues for 8 or 9 years, and there was nobody who expected him to do what he did in September. So those three always stand out for me as players who leaped off the page and had amazing seasons.
And the amazing thing to me about that Yankees team is if you look back, they lost 4 of their first 5 games. Still compiled all those wins, but there was that start of the season. Was it a hangover from '97, or what did it take to really kick them into high gear right at the start of the season?
It's interesting, Kevin, because that first chunk of games gets a lot of attention, as it should. And I wrote about it. And
Hmm.
having covered George Steinbrenner for as many years as I had, there was clearly talk about Joe Torre's job status. What I wrote about in the book, which something that hasn't been discussed as much, is Brian Cashman was in his first year as general manager, and he wondered if he was going to lose his job because of the message that George Steinbrenner was sending to him. I think that there's a chance that they started off with a little bit of a malaise. And when you start, and this is no excuse, hey, they went on to win 125 games. But when an East Coast team spends 7 weeks in spring training and then you start your season 3,000 miles away, I do think that's a factor too. I think, oh, wow, the first road trip of the season, you're heading out west. But Kevin, in the end, that start was one of the best things that ever happened to them because Torre laid into them. Torre, who had great respect in that clubhouse, didn't raise his voice all that often, raised his voice. It impacted the players. And I know unsolicited, when I interviewed all of the players for this book, many of them brought up the early season start and then the brawl they had with Baltimore in May, where Benitez hit Tino Martinez. And a team that didn't need to be galvanized was galvanized because of what Benitez did and essentially punching them in the face. And they punched back harder.
Baseball is a long season, and obviously there are going to be peaks and valleys along the way. Does it take little moments like that along the path to kind of remind you of the ultimate goal and to remind you of that you are a team working together?
I think it does because I'm a baseball guy. I covered the other sports at the beginning of my career, but I know in football, for instance, you are gearing up for that one game, and so you're getting hyped, and then Friday becomes Saturday, becomes Sunday. You've been around baseball. You can't really do that in baseball because if a manager did that, he would lose the clubhouse in a week. But that being said, moments like we just discussed, I went back and watched the video of Benitez hitting Tino. I must have watched it 15 times. And every time I noticed one more thing about a Yankee going after Benitez. They were so angry with Benitez that he threw intentionally at Tino after Bernie hit a home run that I do think that a brotherhood that was already strong got even stronger. So absolutely, I do think those moments stand out. Again, it can't be every day. It can't be somebody standing on top of a table in the clubhouse waving a towel every day. But I do think there are moments where things happen that they resonate and they help you for the rest of the year.
One thing that jumped out at me during the book and a part that I really enjoyed is that you sat down with Jason Varitek to kind of get a
Yep.
scouting report on that team. And obviously Varitek and the Yankees have a very interesting weaving of histories here. But I love the fact about the respect that he had for Derek Jeter, even after the comment that he made, kind of dissing him, as you said. So I thought that was very interesting to see from a Red Sox perspective what they thought of that Yankees team too.
I'm glad you said that because obviously this is a Yankee dominant book, but I did talk to some other players about that Yankee team. Varitek was one. John Flaherty was a catcher for Tampa Bay. I actually work with him at Yes right now. So that was a pretty easy interview since we sit across from each other many nights. But I appreciated, Kevin, that Varitek, I'm not a teacher, I was going to say took the assignment seriously, but treated the interview seriously.
Mm-hmm.
This was 25 years ago. He had work to do that day with the 2022 Red Sox. But once we sat down in the dugout and started talking about that team, I could see him transferring himself back to being behind the plate and saying to himself, how the heck am I going to get these guys out? So his scouting report was essential, and I'm happy that we have it in the book.
It's a great piece of it. And last question for you. So does the 98 Yankees, is that the bar then for all the Yankees teams moving forward?
That's a great question, Kevin. I think the short answer would be yes. Who wouldn't want to be compared to that 98 team? What was interesting is last year, the 22 team, which ended up getting swept by the Astros in the ALCS, they got off to an amazing start. I don't have the numbers in front of me. 61 and 23 or something like that. And there were comparisons being made to the 98 team. And I have a ton of respect for the 2022 team. But as those comparisons were being made, there was a part of me that was saying, I don't know. I just feel like the 98 team was stronger. The 98 team was more dominant. And then the 2022 team had a dip where for about 6 weeks it didn't play very well. But yeah, I think that has to be the bar for any future Yankee team. Will we ever see it? I'm not sure. In my lifetime, I've seen several Yankee championship teams, but no one like that team. And there were some really good teams. The 96 team was special because it was Jeter's rookie year, Torrey's first year, 2000 Subway Series. So, of course, in the tri-state New York area, that's all you heard about. But that 98 team, they just rampaged people. And from, I steal something David Cohn told me, from 1 through 25, rosters were 25 then, not 26. He felt that was the best constructed roster in baseball history. He said, if that makes us the best team ever, I don't know. But everybody knew his role. And the part of that goes along with that, Kevin, is Coney said, because everyone knew his role, it gave you confidence. Okay, I'll do my job because I know player X and player Y is going to do his job. So I thought that was interesting too, that they had such respect for each other and such confidence in each other.
Well, it's a great read. The 1998 Yankees, the inside story of the greatest baseball team ever. Jack Curry from Yes Network, thanks so much for being on today. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Kevin. I appreciate it.